All right. Welcome. So this is the first episode of, from what I'm calling it right now, is Let Your Light Shine. So little story on this is over the last couple months, I got this feeling like I should talk and start a podcast about my own spiritual journey, my relationship with my relationship with God, what I've gone through, what I've experienced, and share my viewpoints on it. It's something that when I get into conversations with people, it's a deep conversation. It's something I've thought about a lot in my life. I've had to watch my father die, experience that. This podcast is my journey. I grew, and that's what I'm starting out with right now, is I want to talk to you about, where it all started with me. And I'll get into my theory, my viewpoints, and all this other stuff, around this. So, but, growing up, I started going to a Southern Baptist Christian school. I'm trying to remember if I was going. I started going there in second grade. I don't remember going too much prior to that. So my mom talked to me about religion. She had a background in with having Mormons in her family, Jehovah's Witnesses, Christians, and all this other stuff. So she had a lot of a diverse background. My dad's side of the family was Italian American and Polish American, so they were Catholic. And my grandma was, a devout Catholic, and looking back, like our family's like little Mother Teresa. She wasn't perfect, but, she was an angel. I started going to this Christian school because I was going to a school called Carden Hall, and there was an incident one day where I was in second grade, and I want to give you this story. I just want to talk to you about this. I'm going to give you the whole details of all this stuff. So I was in class, wasn't able to go. The teacher wouldn't let me out to go to the bathroom. So I ended up going to the bathroom in my pants, and I was so embarrassed. I lied to people there. They said all this other stuff. But when my mom found out, she went ballistic upon the principal. And this teacher was kind of mean and all this other stuff. There was no need to be like this. So that ended, needless to say, by my mom going ballistic on the principal. They asked us to leave. And I ended up spending the rest of that year going to public school just for a few months. And then the next year I started at a Southern Baptist Christian school in third grade. And then, obviously in a school like that, you're going to get, religious studies, you're going to get all that. So, I ended up going there and starting there in third grade. And, this was a troubling time during my life. I don't know, second grade, I forget how old I was, but I'll figure that out. But, in those years I had my father ended up, moving out and living with my grandma. So I experienced that. I had to go through and, get asked to leave that school, get embarrassed in that classroom. And then when I started this Christian school in third grade, age-wise, I was a year ahead. So I was younger than everybody, just because my mom started me early. And I was doing good. And, from what I remember. And then one day, this all relates to our own journeys in life, because what we do in this life affects us, right? Spiritually, emotionally, all that stuff. It's all connected. I ended up going to the bathroom third grade with the door open and some girl walked by. So then during the middle of the school year, my first year, like few months at this school, they ended up saying, hey, you're not mature enough to be in this grade. So they ended up taking me out of third grade and put me back into second grade. And, that was part of that. That was traumatic in its sense, what it does to you. I know, going through testing and saying you're not at reading levels and just feeling not good enough, right? I mean, those experiences of, not being treated by a teacher, having to move schools, and then, you're in third grade, you get moved out. Like, man, being that young and how that affects you is, and then having your dad leave and having all that happen, was a big part of that too. It's a lot to happen during those times. And, I started going to the school, and I remember starting, as my mom would send me to, I ended up starting going to like Sunday school and stuff. She rarely came. I just usually went by myself. So the conversation was opened up, and then, I started a program called RAs at that school, which was like Boy Scouts, but it was, put on by that school. It's called Royal Ambassadors. So you learn a lot of stuff. You learn a lot of stuff about, religion and that, and Sunday school and all the stories and that. So, I remember probably 10, 11, 12 years old or something like that, going through youth group. And youth group was fun because you used to go every Wednesday night. They had have dinner. You'd hang out with friends. You'd go do fun stuff. And then every year, a couple times a year, you'd have Midnight Madness, which we do this whole renting vans and all stuff. So it was a lot of fun. Like, it was a lot of fun, a lot of community, and it was a good experience. And I know every Sunday they would have people they invite people to get saved and all this other stuff. And then, being in that process of being 11, 12 years old, I think that's when it really was like, that's when the conversation started to do it, come up about baptism and being saved and asking Jesus into your heart and all this other stuff. And I took that, right? I don't know if I was, hard to remember now, right? 10, 11, 12, something like that. And whatever that meant for me then, I remember getting baptized and all that stuff. Because it was the thing. It was who everybody hung out with. It was that, right? And I remember actually a couple years later when it got into, girls and all this other stuff of like, how I was like, I remember the promise rings. Like, we had these, like, the Irish promise rings that would kind of do that. That was kind of big at that time. And we're promising to be abstaining from premarital sex, all this stuff. So that whole process, but I was like, yes. And then as I got a little older, I was like, no. And then, I actually left that school from 5th grade when I was going into junior high, and got to experience a whole new world. So I stepped out of that world of, just the complete being going to school in a Christian environment, spending my weekends, some of my weeknights in a Christian environment, being a part of all that stuff. So, and outside of that, the really only non-Christian based stuff I had was baseball and football. But then, into my 5th grade year, I wanted to experience something different. Ended up going to a public school in Huntington Beach, California, called Dwyer Middle School, and that was my first experience into, not a private school environment. I'd gone to private school in my life, not because we were well off, because my dad sacrificed and paid for it, and we definitely weren't that. So yeah, I ended up going, getting experience in a whole different realm of like kids, having, be pregnant, girls in 7th, 8th grade being pregnant. And it was a whole different world. People doing drugs, which that conversation never ended up. So, and then fighting, like literally that people were looking for fights. And I remember that was a huge experience. A switch from going from private school to a public school, and just the kind of different environment. So that only lasted a year. They actually ended up during that time taking me from 5th grade. I skipped 6th grade and went straight to 7th grade because the education in our private school was right a lot of times a little bit ahead of what you are in public school. So ended up going there, and bad year, like D's, F's, failed PE, like everything. It was just too much freedom, too much whatever. And so I went back for my 8th grade year, and they were wanting to hold me back and put me through that Schwergemer role because I actually caught up to my original classmates that I in 3rd grade that ended up doing. And then, they were like, they wanted to hold me back, and I was like, no, I'm not going backwards. Like, you should have never done this to me, whatever. So they put me in a special class where I could do work at my own pace, and I ended up like all the stuff they were testing me out, I made up it within like I made up like 2 to 3 years worth of stuff that I was behind in and stuff like that. And all this, it was like workbooks and all that stuff. It was a great environment. Kind of indicative of how I operate now. But, yeah, so then I ended up going from that school into a Catholic high school. And, again, like you're completely surrounded by religion, but this became a different thing. And I want to stop at that Baptist school because I kind of had core fundamental problems with it, right? Like my alerting, I can't say that I'm a theologian and I've spent thousands of hours into whatever, but what I did learn and what I did end up feeling was I became misaligned. So one of the first times that I started to reject like Baptist religion or the messages coming out of that was I was in youth group, and they were talking about salvation and other religions and all that stuff. And they end up saying that Catholics were going to hell. And I was like, wait a second. So I raised my hand and I was like, okay, so you're saying this. Are you talking, what about my grandma? She goes to church every weekend. And they're like, yep. And that's when it stopped making sense. And that's when I started rejecting what they would say. Because honestly, to this day, I'm maybe it was just one person's doctrine. But I do believe that there's a lot of that in Christianity about judgment of other religions. They judged, the sentiment coming out of that was everybody else is going to hell. And, throughout my life, I've come to this realization is that, there is something out there that says thou shalt not judge, and that the judgment that we'll face isn't by, it's not for us to judge where we're going to go or not going to go, who's going to go or not going to go, who's right or wrong, who's not right or wrong, right? We are not the judge. That's my belief. And to impose beliefs upon other people is not, I don't believe that that's what we're supposed to be doing. I don't feel that's right, right? I accept your beliefs. Who are their beliefs? Just don't impose them upon me. There's certain core moral principles that we should probably follow, not killing, not doing anything like that, these types of things. But, those were some of the things that started to really push back upon, I started to push back upon. The other one was my other grandma was in a car accident, had some, she had the slow deterioration of her mental faculties, and, she became, Alzheimer's-like. She didn't have Alzheimer's. It was due to hydroencephalus, which is a fluid on the brain. And they asked her not to come anymore. We'd bring her to Wednesday night. It was a Wednesday night dinner and Bible study and stuff. And she would, she wandered a lot. She'd walk up to people and all this other stuff. And people in the church said, oh, they're making me uncomfortable. So the associate pastor asked us not to bring her anymore. And I said, this doesn't make sense. This is not what the message of Jesus Christ is. It's not the message of this, right? Like, I mean, the story of a leper, you're going against that right now because somebody's not comfortable. And that is not right. So you guys are inauthentic and out of alignment with what you truly believe and what you say you believe. So that was another instance of my, and again, it's people within that, but that's a representation of that, right? So being, young and rejecting and that and all that. So the other part was, is when your sexual desires come up, that was my own thing, right? That was like, I wanted to go and do my own thing on that. And I didn't want to feel guilty or judged because of that. And people can argue that. I don't, beliefs or not beliefs. That was my young reasoning at the time. But when I went to a Catholic high school, it was a different experience. Like there was the judgment was gone. The majority of the judgment was gone, honestly, because there it was all business, right? We were sports high school. We had people that were of different faiths, different religions, different backgrounds, and there wasn't judgment. And then we actually went through world religion and got to study religions. So that was my journey. And then when I got, once I got to high school, I stepped away from going to the Southern Baptist school. I completely misaligned with, I can't say it's all them. It was me too. I wanted to experience my own journey. But I always saw this correlation between, and I felt like the message being taught by religions, there was core fundamental principles in there that were aligned with making your life successful and making you happy. And if we just kind of dissected, out the doctrine of it and looked at the principles and the practices and things like that and what was being said and don't attach this to anything besides what the underlying meaning was, right? And that there was something there. And so I always looked at and heard and felt the principles in that sense. Thou shalt not judge, right? If you look at that success principles and that, I could see how judging yourself and judging other people gives you peace. Through peace, we find power. And, so there was that became a part of my own conversation, and, I didn't go to church much, didn't study much besides what I had to do in school during high school. Ended up taking another world religion class, I believe, in college, maybe I didn't. I did take a Eastern philosophies of healing and health, which introduced me to more Eastern culture and Eastern in there. And I always felt like there's principles on the other side of the realm, Buddhism, Hinduism, that are getting us to try to do things that, Judeo-Christian religions are trying to get us to do, right? The practices, the reasoning behind it, and, into that. And I'll get into the more depth in later podcasts, but I just want to introduce you to my journey. But there's something else that started to come up about 99-2000, which was this conversation with intuition. And my dad, one thing I learned from him and observed and thing was that he had a knack. He had this intuition about people, if they were going to be good or be bad or be a schmuck or not. And I was like, I feel some of that too. And one of the first times, was when when I found out he was sick, there became a new conversation in me, a new feeling inside me, that I started to express through poetry and, in a journal, which I never journaled before. And then, that started to come up, and these feelings of like listening to my intuition at that time. That's how I classified it. And one night, the night my dad passed, I actually was going to go home, but I just felt this little voice inside of me say, go to the hospital. And I was like, and it was like, okay, I'm going to go to the hospital, right? And I'll get deeper into these things. And if I would not listen to that voice, I wouldn't have been there for my dad's passing. If I would have been there for my dad's passing and being able to, be there with him while he was in this terrified state and he was choking and he was all this other stuff. And I can go deeper on that another time, but and I metaphorically and physically picked him up and helped him pass. I passed him onto the bed, and when I laid him down, he was gone. And if I wouldn't listen to that, I wouldn't have been there. And if I wouldn't have been there, I don't think I would have been able to handle the situation as much as well and experience that. And though it being painful, it was a very good experience for me, right? It was a very transformative experience, and I feel fortunate for being able to be there. So that's an example. And then, I had his best friend. We had these similar conversations that we're going to have on this podcast. And I'll go into depth in that. We had these deep spiritual types of conversations. And that became the awakening of like, okay, I'm going to express this and talk about this. And I have over the years. But then I've also rejected it. I went down different paths and went away from it. But I always looked to what I learned and what I heard and the lessons to apply to my life. Not always perfect, right? And I'll go deeper into that, but, and I started to listen to my intuition and my inner voice more and more and more. And, I had this struggle between making decisions with my head or making with my inner voice. And the times I did with my head, they weren't as good as the ones that I did with my inner voice and da-da-da-da. And we'll go deeper into that. So that's what it came out to be, is like these actions of listening to that inner voice. And then, I started to meditate in the beginning or the end of 2015. I started entering in a conversation with Wake Up Warrior at that time about some, meditation. I don't remember if the voice was talked about then, but what I noticed throughout 2016, I went like 88 days of straight meditation for the first time in forever, right? And what I found was, those intuitive senses, those intuitive feelings became stronger. They became clearer. And it was like they were guiding me. So then that started opening me back up to about meditation. And then one time I was listening to, continuing the practice of meditation, journaling, and things like that. Wasn't always consistent, but started that. And then I was listening to a podcast through Wake Up Warrior, and Sam Falsami. I even fucked up his name. Sorry, I cussed too. So, those of you think I'm going to hell. Okay, you're judging me. Better consider that. Started talking about the purpose of meditation, and the purpose of the meditation was to connect to the voice. And I was like, the voice, and the voice is God. And I was like, oh, this what makes sense. Like it started to really connect for me and be something that was that made a lot of sense and that I felt was truth, right? And that was something that was always there, that told me to go to the hospital, that certain things I've gone over, made decisions or done things in my life based off of that. Where was that? And it was, for me, from that point on, I was like, yes, for me, that is God. God, the guidance of God, whoever you believe that to be, that's my interpretation of that. And through scripture and learning about that, you can learn to apply the principles and apply that to get closer to that. And we'll go into depth more about this future podcast. And then, so, that kind of brings us to today, and really learning and filtering my decision making and where I'm going through that voice, not through my head. I take in through, and where my life is guiding me. in that. So for me, where I'm at now, I've started to go back to church because of community, and of, being understanding and learning more. I'm not amazing at reading scripture every day. I do subscribe that, God does speak through us and we have our own revelations as well. So journaling, writing, reflective thought is a part of that process, extension of scripture. And people might condemn me for that or tell me I'm wrong, but again, you're judging. So consider that. And that's where I'm at for today. Like up till today, my journey has come to this part. The voice, I had this feeling to do this like a month and a half, 2 months ago, and I didn't, right? And then I was on a podcast today and someone said, I mentioned it, and they're like, we had this deep conversation about spirituality, all this other conversation, and then it came up and he's like, you need to do that. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I need to do that. So that's why I'm here. And I'm not sure on the regularity of this podcast. I'm not sure, no real direction. It's just going to be what I authentically feel. So I hope you enjoyed hearing my story. I hope that my insights spark just thought. I want to influence your beliefs. I want to just get you to think and come to your own conclusions, right? Because there's things that I don't agree with that, that regardless of where we're at in life and all that stuff, and I'm going to express that. I'm going to share that with you. Whoever you are, 1-0 listeners, I don't know. But yeah, so I was going to title this podcast My Spiritual Journey. And then, I was on the conversation with a podcast I was just on, and it came up about letting your light shine. And for me, I think the process of our life is to learn how to allow our lights to shine as bright as they already are, and not do that. Because one of the songs that I remember from my Baptist upbringing was, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. I'm going to let it shine. I'm going to let it shine. Are you going to hide it behind a bushel? No. And I think in that there's a principle of show your true self, be your true self, and don't dampen your light. And I think that light, the source of that light is your soul. And your soul is truly the purest form of who you are. And our process of our humanism dampens that light. Our humanism tells us not to have that light. So I got to get going, and I'll talk to you soon. Hope you have a great day.